backwards. When you look in your microscope, the image is upside down and backwards. How come when I look out there, you're not all upside down and backwards? Your brain actually is going to fix that for you. Yep. And sometimes different disorders you can have problems fixing that for you. You know, sometimes backwards, not quite right. You get a good hard knock on the back of the head. Sometimes things are blurry or double vision, exactly. So the way light is bent is talked about in Focusing on Light on the Retina, page 557, and Focusing for Distance and Focusing for Close. So in order to visualize something clearly, I have to bring light waves in and get it to where? Yeah, that area on the back of the retina. What do we call that again? The macula luteae, fovea centralis region. So the amount of light that comes in is going to be accommodated for by the iris, and who else? Who else is going to help bend that light just right? The lens. So in order to focus on an object, far or near, I have to perform certain functions with my eye in order to get those light waves to the point they need to come to in order for me to visualize it. And if I don't have a problem doing that, and I'm going to skip ahead, skip ahead to there. If I don't have a problem doing that, if my eye is able to compensate for all of the things associated with vision, I can bring that focal point, that highest point of vision, right to where it needs to go. If my eye can do that, I have what we call an emmetropic eye. What's another way to describe a person who has an emmetropic eye? They have 20/20 vision. When you go into lab, you're going to test your visual acuity. And how do you do that? Yeah, you stand 20 feet away from an eye chart. And we've established sort of the standard. If I can see a certain line at 20 feet away clearly, I have 20/20 vision. What if I can't see it? What if I have to make the letters a little bit bigger? Yeah. The worse your vision gets, the higher the number on the bottom will get. So the worse your visual acuity is, if your eye can't quite make the compensations it needs, you need to correct that vision in order to have 20/20 vision. But that person that has 20/20 vision can actually see the line that you can see. Say you have 20/30 vision. The letters are actually a little bit bigger. Am I making sense? That person with 20/20 vision can move to 30 feet away and see that line. No problem. If you have 20/40 vision, guess what that 20/20 person can do? Move to 40 feet away and see what you see at 20 feet. So that's what those numbers come from, or that's where they come from. So accommodation of the lenses, constriction of the pupils, and since you have two eyes, what else has to happen in order for you to be able to visualize something clearly? Both of your eyes have to work together. So that's described under convergence of the eyeballs. So both your eyes are going to sort of hone in on something when you look at something in order to visualize it clearly. So all of these things have to be in order for you to see something clearly, to get that light to the point it needs to get just the way it should be. And again, that's the focal plane or the focal point. So light has to come in, it has to go through the cornea, the aqueous humor, the lens, and be bent and sent to the macula luteae.
So the vitreous humor, that bends it to the backward
It helps, yep. The lens is doing most of the work, but it's also being refracted through that fluid as well. So what happens if my eyeball's a little bit too long? Maybe it's shaped like a football instead of a basketball. Can all that accommodation I do get that focal point to where it needs to go? No. It happens too close before where it needs to go. So everything's kind of what? Blurry. You are myopic or nearsighted if that's the case. How do I correct that? What do I do to the light? Can I lengthen that light wave just a little bit? Yeah, with a concave lens, and if you look at glasses, anybody wear bifocals? Yeah, you got both. The concave lens is for your distance vision. So a myopic person has no problem seeing things far away because their eyeball and all of those structures can accommodate for that. But they have problems seeing what? Things far away. So nearsighted, their near sight is good. They can't see things far away. Make sense? And how do I correct that? With a concave lens that lengthens those light waves enough to hit the mark as to where it needs to go. What if you get short, fat, little chubby eyeballs? The light waves are going to come in, all of your structures are going to do a certain thing, but unfortunately it's going to hit before that sharpest point of visual acuity. So what do I do? Oh, by the way, you are hyperopic or farsighted. You don't have any trouble seeing things far away, but what? You're going to have trouble seeing things close up. Correct. Now, there's other things that can cause you to be nearsighted or farsighted or myopic or hyperopic. All of those other things, like your extrinsic eye muscles, pressure in your chambers, okay? But this is just one scenario. How do I correct for a hyperopic eye? Hyperopic eye. Yeah. I'm going to use convex lenses, and what's that going to do to the light waves? It's going to shorten them up so they can hit that focal point where they need to. So there's three types of vision: emmetropic, myopic, hyperopic. Know how to correct for them. And all of those things described to you on page 558 and 559 regarding accommodation for close and distance vision are important to remember. So they talk about some of the homeostatic imbalances. And again, nearsighted and farsighted individuals can be that way for many different reasons, not just because of the shape of their eyeball, but they can have problems with pupil constriction. They can have problems with convergence, problems with muscles in the eye. Anybody ever told they have a lazy eye? Those muscles can give problems with convergence. If both my eyes can't work in unison, I'm going to have problems with focusing. Yeah, and what do they do?
Actually stops my eye focusing without helping the eye at all. Singularly, it can't focus more than 50 feet away.
Right, because those muscles won't allow it to get to the place it needs to get to bring those light waves in. Sometimes when we're little, it's just because those eye muscles aren't really strong enough. So it's sometimes, and it's embarrassing for the poor little child, what do they do to them? They put an eye patch on them. So they're going to patch up the strong eye and hopefully create stronger muscles in the weaker eye. That works sometimes, but not all the time. Huh? Yeah. And did it help? No. And some of us, like I've had bifocals since I was in junior high school. And it's not because I have a hyperopic eye. It's because my eye muscles weren't as strong. So I had trouble going from close up to far away. I'd get a lot of eye strain because the muscles weren't as strong as they needed to be for convergence. So it's not always the shape of your eyeball that causes problems. Another thing that might cause problems is a little ripple in your cornea. Astigmatisms. So when that light comes in, instead of coming in nice and clean to the back, it's going to hit the ripple and bounce off a little bit. So I can correct for that with my lenses if I have an astigmatism as well. All right, the next part of the chapter, this is the scary part, is the physiology of photoreceptors and phototransduction. And this is where that scary C word comes in, chemistry. So how do these things work, these photoreceptors? Well, first of all, the photoreceptors are located where? They're located in the retina. And I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm going to go back. To this picture to describe how these guys are working. And I want you to pay close attention to the orientation of the tissue. This here is the path of light. Light is coming this way. So if I had to fill in the drawing, what's going to be over here? That's where my cornea is. That's where my pupil is, and my lens, my iris, all those guys. So this is at the back of the eyeball. So when light comes in and hits this area, it has to sort of be drawn to the back end of this layer of tissue, where the photoreceptors are. So it's going to pass by two very important layers for vision and do absolutely nothing. Because these guys, this group of cells called the ganglion cells, and this group of cells called the bipolar cells, are not photoreceptors. Guess what they are? They transmit message. They're sensory neurons. But what's their stimulus? Not light. Chemicals. What are those chemicals that neurons speak to each other in? Neurotransmitters. So the light actually passes by these two groups of cells and has to come to this point. What's back here? Think of the layers of the eyeball. This is the retina. Who's behind here? The choroid layer. And then there's actually a little bit more of dark pigment in these epithelial cells that hold in the receptors for vision. That layer of the retina is called the pigmented layer of the retina. So there's even more black drawing that light towards that portion of the eye. When enough light comes in to fire off these receptors, they're then going to be fired off in certain patterns depending on how the light comes in, and then they're going to send message back in this direction. So they're going to send message from the receptors, and there's two different kinds. There's some that we call cones, and cones are going to pick up what? Certain colors in the spectrum, like your green and your yellow and your blue. And rods, which are going to pick up what? Darker tones, the grays, the blacks, the whites. Okay? So these are kind of our black and white vision, and these are our color vision. And once I get enough stimulus, and they fire off, they're then going to send their message back up in this direction. Did you have a question?
People who are colorblind, it just means they have less of the cones.
It means that we have several different groups of cones, different combinations of cones that are fired off by different combinations of light. And if you're colorblind, you have a problem with your chemistry in certain groups of your cones.
So, like a feeling or a green receptor would be this.
Yeah, it's usually blue-green. And where do we describe that in the book? It's in here somewhere. But there's two groups of cones that pick up different combinations of the visual spectrum. and it's all a chemical reaction, which we're going to go over, but we're not going to get crazy about. So, different combinations of light, different light from different portions of the spectrum will fire off these receptors. When a neuron fires off, what happens? Go back, think. You have to have a certain amount of stimulus in order for, when a neuron fires off, what do we call it? To reach the threshold point so that depolarization can take place. Very good. Do you see in color at night?
Yes.
You think you do, but you don't. How come?
Because there's no light in the light.
There's not enough light being refracted off colored objects to fire off your what? To fire off your cones.
Does her brain say, okay, it's going to be green?
No, you're actually seeing in black and white. You just don't even know it unless you're paying attention.
That's
Pay attention tonight. It's like, oh, damn, I never noticed that.
I don't see that.
Not enough light
See, I knew
to fire off. Remember, you need enough stimulus to reach threshold to cause depolarization. And who's going to help me with that? Your irises. So that's why when you go out at night, they're going to open up really, really wide. And sometimes, if you give it enough time, you get used to the low intensity light. So you can see a little bit better. And then when somebody turns the light on, it's like, because your pupils are all wide like that. So we need enough of a stimulus to fire off different patterns of rods and cones, and that's why we see different light patterns in different images, because of the different patterns of light that are being refracted into our eyes, and different types of rods and cones firing off. And we need to know this pathway. So rods and cones fire off, then they send message, neurotransmitters, to the next guy in line. What are they called? Bipolar cells. And there's two groups of cells that are going to sort of fine-tune the message. They're called horizontal cells and amacrine cells that are then going to pass that message on to the next group of cells, which are called the what? The ganglion cells. And the axons of ganglion cells is what is in your what? Yeah, your optic nerve. So pay attention when you dissect your eyeball. At the back of the eyeball, all of those axons of those ganglion cells along the whole entire retina are going to converge and go down the optic nerve and bring message to the brain for processing.
Was that little,
Nope, the little bump is where all those axons kind of come together. And that's a place in your retina called the optic disc. And the optic disc, yeah, that's the bump. The optic disc is where all of those, and if you look really close, you can see all those little cells, right? Here are the rods and cones, the bipolar cells, the ganglion cells. All those axons are going to come together and run down the optic nerve to the brain. Well, that place where they all come together, right in this region, are there any photoreceptors there? What do they call that? That's your blind spot. And it's kind of a little divot. When you dissect your eyeball, run your finger along that. Try not to cut through where the optic nerve is. You can feel a little hole. That's where the optic disc is. And that's your blind spot. And the reason it's a blind spot is because there's no photoreceptors there. So think about light shining in. It doesn't really, the sharpest vision, you, go to my fovea centralis, but there's still light being shown and firing off all the receptors in my peripheral vision, except for that optic disc area. And that's my blind spot. All right. Oh, should I get into chemistry? Okay, this is a good place to stop. So we're going to pick up with the chemistry of visual pigments, page 562. On Thursday. Will we finish this chapter? Yes. So make sure you read it, because we're going to get through the rest of the senses. Hearing's a little bit, the sight is the longest one. Hearing's next, and then the other two are short.